The courtroom froze. Judge Amy Coney Barrett leaned forward, her tone sharp as glass, and launched a verbal strike so cutting it seemed to slice through the air itself. "Congresswoman Crockett," she declared, voice dripping with disdain, "your presence here is little more than political theater. You lack the depth, the pedigree, and frankly, the respect for this institution to speak on matters of law." The words thundered with the authority of her black robe, words meant not just to silence but to humiliate, to remind everyone who held the power in that room. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The cameras zoomed closer. Even seasoned reporters exchanged glances, startled at the rawness of the attack. It wasn't a measured judicial critique. It was a dismissal, a public attempt to reduce Jasmine Crockett to nothing more than an interloper in a sacred chamber of power. For a moment, the weight of that insult seemed to hang suspended, heavy, suffocating, undeniable. But then came the silence. Crockett did not flinch. She did not rush to defend herself, nor did she mirror Barrett's venom. Instead, she looked directly at the judge, her eyes steady, unyielding, carrying generations of quiet defiance. That gaze was not just a look, it was a history lesson, a reminder of every voice that had been told it did not belong, every immigrant told to go back, every working-class child told to stay in their place. Her silence spoke a language that needed no translation. You cannot break what has already been forged in fire. The tension in the room thickened. Barrett shifted slightly, perhaps expecting outrage or a stammered rebuttal. Instead, the Congresswoman's composure unsettled her, made the attack echo louder in the ears of everyone listening. The cameras captured the contrast perfectly: arrogance seated high on the bench, calm resolve rising from below. Observers leaned forward, sensing the drama was far from over. Because silence was never Jasmine Crockett's final word. It was the prelude, the inhale before the storm. And as the seconds ticked by, that storm gathered weight, promising not just a rebuttal, but a reckoning. But no one expected her next move, the response that would flip the trial on its head. Why did this moment matter so much? Because this was no ordinary courtroom exchange. It was a collision of forces that symbolized the very struggle consuming America, the clash between a lifetime-appointed Supreme Court justice cloaked in institutional authority, and a freshman congresswoman who carried with her the pulse of grassroots America. On one side sat Judge Amy Coney Barrett, an emblem of entrenched power. Her seat was permanent, her robe a symbol of untouchable authority, her words armed with the weight of precedent and the machinery of the state. To challenge her was to risk not only ridicule but political exile. Few dared to speak back, and fewer still survived unscathed. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, barely months into her congressional career, still considered by many in Washington as an outsider who had not earned the right to speak at such a high level. She did not arrive backed by dynasties of wealth or pedigrees carved into marble. She came from Texas grit, a working-class firebrand with a voice sharpened in community fights and local courts. Against Barrett's aristocratic bearing, Crockett seemed, at least on paper, like the underdog destined to be steamrolled. And yet, here she was. The stakes could not have been higher. This was not just a legal proceeding tucked away in some chamber. It was televised, dissected in real time, every line destined for social media virality. Every word was ammunition in the larger war over whose America would prevail. The America of gatekeepers who believed they alone defined legitimacy, or the America of ordinary people demanding their voices be heard. Barrett's attack was not random, it was tactical. By belittling Crockett's credibility, she sought to delegitimize not just the woman standing before her, but the millions who identified with her, immigrants who had clawed for dignity, working families who had been told they weren't good enough, and young progressives who believed their fresh voices could shape the country's future. To Barrett, it was a reminder that power belonged to the few. To Crockett, it was proof that her very existence in that room was threatening enough to warrant a strike. And the nation felt the tension. News outlets had been primed for this confrontation. Headlines teased a showdown. Commentators whispered about the risks Crockett faced by speaking too boldly. Would she buckle under the pressure of Barrett's authority? Would she be cast as reckless, naive out of her depth? That was the gamble, because Crockett's supporters knew one slip, one moment of faltering would be weaponized endlessly against her. But Crockett was no novice in the art of survival. She had been underestimated before, by prosecutors, by opponents, by systems that doubted her place in the halls of power. And each time she had turned doubt into fuel. This wasn't just courtroom sparring, it was about who defines truth in America. Was truth the polished statement handed down from robed elites, unquestioned and unchallenged? Or was it the voice rising from the margins, raw and unrefined, yet unshakably authentic? The room brimmed with anticipation. The attack had landed, the silence had stretched, and the balance of power hung in the air. People in the gallery leaned forward, sensing that history was being written in real time. The question was no longer whether Jasmine Crockett belonged there. The question was how she would answer. And that answer was coming. To understand the weight of Judge Amy Coney Barrett's words that day, one had to see the story behind the robe. The image she projected to the world was one of solemnity, dignity, and reverence for the Constitution. But beneath that polished surface was a record that told another tale, one of partisan alignment, quiet elitism, and decisions that tilted power toward the privileged while leaving the vulnerable to fend for themselves. Barrett did not stumble into the Supreme Court by accident. Her rise was calculated, fueled by powerful backers who saw in her the perfect vessel for their vision of America. She was nominated at a moment of raw political opportunism. Her confirmation rushed through with breathless urgency. And once sworn in, she wielded her lifetime appointment like a shield, untouchable, unaccountable, secure in the knowledge that no election could ever dislodge her. That permanence was her power, and she carried it with a quiet, often smug confidence. In the courtroom, that confidence revealed itself in subtle ways. The faint arch of an eyebrow as she interrupted testimony, the clipped, dismissive tone she used when addressing those she deemed beneath her intellectual station, the smirk, barely perceptible, but devastating in effect, when someone dared to challenge her authority. To many, it was the body language of someone who believed she could not be touched. Her rulings only deepened that perception. Over and over again, Barrett aligned herself with decisions that critics described as narrow elitist and hostile to the struggles of ordinary people. Whether it was reproductive rights, labor protections, or voting access, her judicial philosophy consistently favored the gatekeepers of power. She framed it as fidelity to the Constitution, but to millions watching, it felt like fidelity to hierarchy, keeping the ladder pulled up and out of reach. It was this pattern that gave her words to Jasmine Crockett such a chilling edge. When Barrett leaned forward to call the Congresswoman's presence political theater, it was not merely an insult. It was the continuation of a long history of silencing. Her attack was not isolated. It was emblematic of a worldview that treated dissenting voices as distractions rather than as democracy. And yet, it was her contradictions that made the moment sting even more. For all her talk of humility and originalism, Barrett enjoyed the trappings of privilege. For all her claims of impartiality, her record aligned almost seamlessly with the partisan movement that elevated her. For all her insistence that judges should not legislate from the bench, her interpretations often reshaped the law in ways that tilted society toward the powerful. These contradictions did not weaken her authority in her own mind. They emboldened it. She carried herself as though the robe absolved her of hypocrisy. The courtroom audience could feel it that day. Every tilt of her head, every clipped sentence, dripped with entitlement. Reporters noted how her tone was less that of a neutral arbiter and more that of a scolding teacher dressing down an unruly student. It was not the law she was defending. It was her throne, and the people watching at home felt that too. Social media lit up in real time, viewers posting clips with captions like, "This is what arrogance looks like," and "She doesn't even pretend to hide the contempt." The outrage was not just about Barrett's words, but about what they represented. They tapped into a broader frustration, a sense that America's most powerful institutions had been captured by a narrow elite who saw ordinary people not as citizens, but as nuisances. Barrett's attack on Crockett crystallized that resentment. Here was a justice, sitting on the highest court in the land, using her platform not to uplift or to listen, but to belittle. And that belittling was strategic. It was the classic move of those who hold unchecked power: diminish your challenger before they can speak, remind them of their smallness before they can rise. Barrett believed the force of her title would be enough to crush the spark in Crockett's eyes. But arrogance has a way of blinding even the most powerful, and Barrett had no idea what was coming. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin in the marble corridors of Washington, nor under the glowing lights of national cameras. It began in Texas, in neighborhoods where the fight for dignity was not an abstract concept debated in law journals, but a daily struggle played out in classrooms, kitchens, and streets. She was the daughter of working class parents who believed in hard work not because it promised luxury, but because it was the only way to survive. From an early age, she learned that respect was not handed down freely. It had to be earned, defended, and often fought for against systems designed to withhold it. In school, Jasmine stood out for her persistence. Teachers noted her sharp mind, but it was her resilience that defined her. When others dismissed her ambition, telling her that people like her did not become lawyers or lawmakers, she tucked those words away, not as discouragement but as fuel. She carried them like coals in her pocket, letting them burn until they became the fire that pushed her forward. Law school was not easy. She did not glide through on legacy or privilege. She scraped, worked, endured. She studied late into the night while balancing jobs to keep herself afloat. In classrooms where professors looked past her, she spoke louder. In debates where she was underestimated, she sharpened her arguments until they cut through the noise. What she lacked in pedigree, she made up for with grit. Her path into practicing law was marked by cases no one else wanted. She defended the overlooked, the voiceless, the ones the system had already decided were guilty before they ever stepped into court. To her, these clients were not statistics, they were reflections of her community, her family, her own journey. She fought for them not just with legal skill, but with an unshakable belief in their humanity. Judges sometimes scoffed, opposing lawyers sometimes sneered, but Crockett never wavered. Every victory was hard-won, every setback a reminder of why the fight mattered. When she entered politics, she carried that same fire. She did not seek office for status. She sought it because she had grown tired of watching others write the rules while communities like hers paid the price. In Texas, she became a relentless advocate, pushing back against voter suppression, economic inequality, and policies designed to keep working families in the shadows. Her speeches were not polished with think-tank jargon. They were raw, direct, laced with the urgency of someone who had lived the consequences of bad policy, and people connected with her. They saw in her someone who understood them, who did not speak down to them but spoke with them. Her voice carried the cadence of kitchen tables and church pews, of protest chants and courtroom battles. She was not trying to perform authenticity. She was authenticity embodied. That was her power. Of course, authenticity comes with cost. Crockett faced threats, smears, dismissals. Opponents tried to paint her as too angry, too radical, too unpolished. But each attempt to diminish her only seemed to strengthen her resolve. She wore the insults as badges, proof that she was striking nerves in places long protected by complacency and privilege. Her calm presence in the courtroom on the day Barrett attacked her was not weakness. It was the product of years spent enduring harder trials than this. She had been talked down to before, by professors, by judges, by politicians who assumed her silence meant submission. But she knew the value of timing. She knew that composure, when wielded carefully, could be more devastating than shouting. Her stillness was not surrender, it was strategy. What Barrett and others failed to understand was that Jasmine Crockett's strength was not born in marble halls, it was forged in fire. It came from watching her community pushed aside and deciding she would not be silent. It came from losing battles but refusing to quit. It came from learning that sometimes the most powerful response to arrogance is patience, letting your opponent reveal themselves before you deliver your strike. On that day, as cameras rolled and the gallery watched, she was not merely a congresswoman trading barbs with a Supreme Court justice. She was the living embodiment of every working class child who'd been told their dreams were too big, every immigrant who had been told their accent disqualified them, every young woman who had been told her place was anywhere but power. Every hardship she endured prepared her for this very moment, standing face to face with a Supreme Court justice. The silence after Barrett's first strike lingered like smoke, thick and suffocating. But the judge wasn't done. She leaned back slightly, her robe folding like dark wings around her, and her voice cut through the chamber again. "This chamber is not a stage for freshman dramatics," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You are not here to lecture the court on justice. You are here to learn your place." The words dripped with contempt, each syllable heavy with the certainty of someone who believed the hierarchy of power was unshakable. The gavel pounded once, the sound echoing like thunder across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, the scratching of pens competing with the faint whir of camera shutters. Barrett's tone sharpened further, her words now carrying a rhythm of scolding authority. "Congresswoman Crockett," she pressed, "if you think grandstanding and sound bites will override centuries of constitutional order, you are gravely mistaken." Gasps rippled through the gallery, followed by murmurs that swelled and then hushed again as court officers scanned the room. Every head turned toward Crockett, waiting to see if she would finally crack under the barrage. But she did not. She stood still, hands folded calmly on the table, her expression unreadable, her silence deliberate. Barrett noticed. Her lips tightened. Dismissal had always worked before. Reduce your challenger to smallness and they would shrink. But Crockett's stillness unnerved her. So she pressed harder, doubling down with the weight of her robe and title. "Your questions," Barrett continued, "betray a lack of understanding that is frankly dangerous in someone entrusted with legislative power. When you distort the law for theatrics, you not only insult this court, you insult the very people you claim to represent." The insult landed like a whip crack. The suggestion was clear. Crockett wasn't just out of her depth, she was a fraud, a threat to the institution itself. The murmurs swelled again, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all charged with anticipation. In the front rows, journalists leaned forward, fingers hovering over keyboards, knowing that a viral moment was seconds away. The cameras flashed, burst after burst of light that caught the polished sheen of Barrett's robe and the calm poise of Crockett's face. Every detail was magnified: the judge's raised chin, the congresswoman's steady eyes, the tension vibrating between them. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Still, Crockett absorbed it all. Each blow, each barb, seemed to vanish into her composure. Her posture was unshaken, her gaze unwavering. She let Barrett's words echo, allowed the gavel's pounding to thunder, endured the murmurs like a storm battering a mountain. She had weathered worse. But beneath her stillness, energy gathered. Observers who knew her could see it. The way her chest rose slightly deeper with each breath, the way her fingers pressed together in measured control. She was not passive, she was preparing. Barrett mistook that calm for weakness. She pressed one last time, her tone biting, her words meant to seal the hierarchy once and for all. Perhaps one day, Congresswoman, you will learn that shouting in the name of dignity does not change the law. But today, in this courtroom, the law does not bow to you. The gavel struck again, the sound so loud it rattled the glasses of water at the tables. The murmurs swelled once more, then hushed into a silence so tense it felt like a wire pulled to its breaking point. And in that silence, all eyes turned to Jasmine Crockett. She had taken the blows, endured the smirks, absorbed the disdain. Now the moment hung before her like a door cracked open, waiting for her to step through. Then, with the nation watching, Crockett drew in a breath, and the energy in the room shifted. Jasmine Crockett's breath lingered in the silence, a pause so deliberate it became its own statement. Every eye in the chamber fixed on her. The cameras tilted closer, lenses hungry for her first word. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, even, yet charged with an authority that startled even those who had come expecting fire. Your Honor, she began, each syllable carrying weight. You call my presence here political theater. But what could be more theatrical than a justice using her robe as a shield to avoid accountability? The gallery gasped. Some stifled laughter rippled through the back rows, quickly silenced by the bailiff's sharp glance. Barrett stiffened, her lips tightening, but Crockett pressed on, her words sharp and steady. I came here today not because I wanted a spotlight, but because the people I represent demanded a voice. And if my presence unsettles you, perhaps it says more about the fragility of unchecked power than about me. Silence followed, a silence thick enough to make Barrett shift in her seat. Crockett's gaze did not waver. She leaned forward slightly, her tone now edged with quiet intensity. You accuse me of not respecting this institution. But respect is earned, not demanded. Respect comes from ensuring that justice is not tilted toward the privileged and the powerful, and I will not apologize for holding this court to that standard. The crowd reacted audibly this time, murmurs, nods, even a smattering of suppressed applause that echoed before the gavel came crashing down to restore order. The sound did not rattle Crockett, it emboldened her. She paused again, letting the tension breathe before delivering the next blow. You claim that I distort the law for theatrics. But what is more distorted, my demand for equal dignity, or a court that rules consistently to narrow the rights of ordinary Americans while expanding the reach of corporations and elites? Gasps again. Whispers snaked through the gallery. The cameras flashed furiously, eager to capture the exact moment when Barrett's expression faltered. And falter it did. Just slightly, a flicker of irritation crossing her face as Crockett's words landed harder than expected. Crockett allowed that flicker to settle before continuing, her voice rising just enough to carry to every corner of the chamber. I know what it's like to be underestimated. I know what it's like to walk into a room and be told I don't belong. But I also know that dignity is not granted by title or robe. It is claimed by standing tall when others try to diminish you. This time, the murmur turned into something deeper, a wave of resonance rolling through the gallery. Some nodded emphatically. Others leaned forward, their eyes wide, watching history unfold. Barrett shifted again, her composure strained by the Congresswoman's refusal to play the role of the subdued novice. Crockett paused once more, letting her words hang in the air before cutting again, sharper now. You say the law does not bow to me, but I say the law does not bow to you either. It bows to the Constitution, and that Constitution was written not to enshrine the privilege of a few, but to guarantee the rights of all. That is why I am here. That is why I will not be silenced. A collective gasp swept the room. Reporters typed furiously, their headlines already forming. The smirk that Barrett had worn earlier was gone, replaced by a tightness around her eyes, the first visible crack in her armor. Crockett seized the moment, her words now flowing with a rhythm that felt unstoppable. I may be a freshman in Congress. I may not have the pedigree of Ivy League institutions or the security of a lifetime appointment. But I have something that cannot be stripped away by arrogance or insult. I have the trust of the people who sent me here. And their voices, their struggles, their dignity will not be erased. The gallery erupted in murmurs so loud the gavel slammed down twice, but even then, the sound could not drown the rising energy in the room. Crockett stood taller, her tone building toward its crescendo. "You told me to learn my place. My place is right here, speaking truth to power. My place is standing firm when even a Supreme Court justice tries to dismiss me. My place is carrying forward the voices of those who never make it inside these chambers. And if that unsettles you, then maybe it's time to ask what kind of justice cannot withstand the truth." The room was electric. Observers glanced at one another with disbelief, as if they had just witnessed a seismic shift in power dynamics. Barrett's face flushed slightly, her hand tightening around the edge of the bench. She opened her mouth as if to interject but quickly closed it again, unwilling to expose further weakness. Crockett let the silence stretch, her final point building like the drumbeat before a crescendo. "This was never about me," she said, her voice steady but carrying a resonance that filled the room. "This is about what justice means in America. It is about whether this court belongs only to the elite or whether it belongs to every worker, every immigrant, every child who dares to dream of something better." She paused, scanning the chamber, her eyes locking briefly with Barrett's. The moment was heavy, unbreakable. Then she delivered the final blow. "You may sit on the highest court in the land, but you do not sit above the people. And today, their dignity speaks louder than your arrogance." The gallery erupted, not with wild applause, but with a rumble of affirmation that shook the air. Reporters whispered to one another, knowing instantly that they had just witnessed the viral moment of the year. Barrett sat frozen, her earlier composure shattered, her silence louder than any retort she might have mustered. For in that instant the tables turned. The underdog congresswoman had not only defended herself, she had reframed the entire trial, shifting it from a spectacle of arrogance into a lesson on justice. And as the murmurs surged and the cameras flashed, one truth became undeniable: Jasmine Crockett had flipped the trial on its head. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words left her lips, the courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. It was the epicenter of an earthquake that rippled outward, carried instantly through glowing screens and buzzing notifications. Within minutes, the clip of her final line, "You may sit on the highest court in the land, but you do not sit above the people," was everywhere. Phones lit up, hashtags bloomed like wildfire, and what had begun as a tense exchange in a chamber of marble became a national phenomenon. On Twitter, one tag surged to the top within the hour: "Indignant over arrogance." Another followed close behind: "Fake Crockett McDrop." Users replayed the clip again and again, marveling at the stillness before her delivery, the way Barrett's face betrayed its first crack of doubt, the eruption of murmurs in the gallery. "Did you see that?" One post read, retweeted tens of thousands of times. "Crockett just made history on live TV." Instagram Reels stitched her calm stare against Barrett's flustered expression, set to swelling music. TikTok creators turned the silence before her punchline into trending soundtracks, overlaying it with captions like, "When your boss thinks you'll stay quiet, but you've got receipts." The meme machine churned instantly: Barrett's tight, lipped scowl juxtaposed with Crockett's steady gaze, tagged with captions like, "One power underestimates dignity." Journalists scrambled to catch up. Headlines blared across digital front pages: "Crockett clashes with Barrett, who really spoke for America?" And "Freshman Congresswoman delivers stinging rebuttal in high-stakes trial." Progressive outlets hailed the moment as a turning point in generational politics, while even mainstream broadcasters couldn't resist the drama of the footage. Analysts replayed the clip on loop, dissecting Crockett's timing, her composure, her refusal to meet venom with venom. And then the ripple spread beyond politics. Late night hosts opened their monologues with the showdown, imitating Barrett's clipped scolding before delivering Crockett's mic drop line to thunderous audience applause. Comedians joked, if looks could kill, Barrett would have been out of a job. Celebrities chimed in on Instagram stories and Twitter feeds. Actors, musicians, athletes, posting clips with captions like, "This is how you handle arrogance." Some simply posted fire emojis, letting the viral moment speak for itself. Activists felt something deeper. For communities long dismissed or silenced, Crockett's composure was validation. Civil rights groups shared the clip alongside reminders of past courtroom battles, framing her as part of a continuum of voices demanding dignity. Immigration advocates wrote, "For every time we've been told to go back, this moment was for us." Women's groups posted, "She stood calm in the face of dismissal and turned silence into power." The resonance was not abstract, it was personal. For young viewers especially, the impact was electric. Students shared the clip in group chats with captions like, "Goals." Teachers in civics classrooms replayed it as a lesson in presence, timing, and courage. On college campuses, Crockett's words became rallying cries, chalked onto sidewalks, painted onto posters. "The law does not bow to arrogance. Even those outside her political lane couldn't deny the drama. Neutral commentators admitted, sometimes grudgingly, that Barrett had been caught off guard. Conservative outlets tried to spin the exchange, but the footage itself was undeniable: the robe, the smirk, the calm stare, the silence, the strike. It was political theater in the truest sense, and Crockett had owned the stage. But what made the moment historic wasn't just the clash of personalities. It was the way it resonated across identities, across communities. For the working-class mother watching at her kitchen table, it was proof that calm dignity could dismantle arrogance. For the immigrant father watching after a double shift, it was a reminder that their children belonged in every chamber of power. For the young woman dreaming of law school, it was an invitation to imagine herself standing tall in the face of dismissal. The shockwaves rolled outward, each retweet and repost deepening the impact. Political strategists whispered about Crockett's future, speculating that she had cemented herself as a rising star. Commentators debated whether Barrett had overplayed her hand, tarnishing the very authority she tried to wield. The conversation was no longer confined to the trial. It was about the future of American justice itself. And yet, even as the hashtags trended and the late-night laughter echoed, something more profound was unfolding beneath the surface. Because this moment was not just viral content. It was a mirror, reflecting back the nation's struggle over who gets to speak, who gets to belong, who gets to define truth. But the shockwaves didn't stop in the courtroom, or even online. They reached the very core of America's political conscience. When the roar of the online frenzy finally settled into a steady hum, what remained was not just a viral clip. It was a lesson etched into the public conscience. Jasmine Crockett had not merely won an exchange, she had reframed the meaning of justice in that moment. What she carried into that courtroom was not the weight of her own ego, but the weight of millions who knew what it meant to be dismissed. And when she spoke back, with calm precision and unwavering resolve, she did so not as an individual sparring with a justice, but as the vessel of a larger truth. Service over elitism, dignity over arrogance. That was the story written in real time. In that courtroom, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every American who's ever been silenced, dismissed, or underestimated. Every worker who's been told their job makes them less. Every immigrant who's been told their accent disqualifies them. Every young woman told to wait her turn while others defined her future. Crockett's defiance was not the loud crash of rebellion. It was the steady heartbeat of resilience. Her words reminded the nation of something too often forgotten: power without humility is brittle. Authority without accountability is hollow. By holding her ground, Crockett exposed the fragility behind Barrett's arrogance. The robe could demand obedience, but it could not manufacture respect. Respect, as Crockett made clear, must be earned by service, by listening, by standing with the people rather than above them. And that message struck deeper than partisan lines. Because at its core, the confrontation wasn't just about one judge and one congresswoman. It was about who we are as a country. Are we a nation that bows to elitism, accepting that power belongs to a select few? Or are we a nation that insists power must answer to the people it claims to serve? History teaches us that every generation faces this question anew. In that courtroom, under the glare of cameras and the watchful eyes of millions, Jasmine Crockett offered an answer. She showed that justice is not a gift dispensed from above. It is a promise built from below, from the lived struggles and quiet dignity of ordinary people. The emotional crescendo swept beyond the trial itself. It touched something in the American spirit, something that remembers democracy is not marble columns and lofty speeches, but the courage of individuals who refuse to be erased. Crockett's calm defiance became a symbol of that courage. She did not shout, she did not waver. She simply stood, and in standing she carried others with her. That is why her words resonated far beyond politics. They tapped into something universal, the need to be seen, the demand to be heard, the truth that dignity is not negotiable. In every replay of that clip, in every classroom discussion, in every whispered conversation at dinner tables, the lesson was the same: justice belongs to all of us, or it belongs to none of us. And so the story closed not on Barrett's smirk, but on Crockett's resolve. The contrast could not have been clearer: arrogance diminishing, dignity rising. It was not the power of title that prevailed, but the power of truth. Because when dignity rises, arrogance falls. Always. Barrett attacked. Crockett responded. And in doing so, she flipped the entire trial. What began as an insult meant to diminish her ended as a defining moment of strength, proof that dignity, when wielded with courage, can bring even the most arrogant to heel. The story will live on not because a justice spoke, but because Jasmine Crockett refused to be silenced. And now the story belongs to you. Because this moment was never just about one courtroom. It was about what kind of America we believe in. Do we accept a nation where elitism hides behind robes and titles, or do we fight for a nation where justice flows from the people? where truth is spoken even in the face of power. Crockett gave us her answer. Now it's time for us to give ours. If you believe in dignity over arrogance, in service over elitism, in the unshakable truth that justice belongs to every American, share this story. Let it travel farther, let it inspire more voices, let it remind those in power that the people are watching. This channel exists to amplify those moments, to bring you the stories that prove resilience is stronger than intimidation, that calm courage can still shake the foundations of arrogance. If you want more, if you want to stand with us in telling these stories, hit subscribe. Leave a comment. What did this moment mean to you? And most importantly, share this with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of dignity. Because this isn't just content, it's a movement. And every time you amplify it, you become part of that movement. Together, we keep the flame of justice burning. Together we rise.